can smile at you right now and say, I'm happy, and be really miserable inside. I can tell you that I'm happy and that you can believe me based on me smiling right now. But if I feel horrible inside, that is the real spiritual experience that I'm having. And it's really the lens that I'm looking through life at, right? The spiritual aspect of things like our personality, our character, our emotions, that is spiritual. I'm not talking about a specific religious belief or practice. I'm talking about the aspects of life we cannot see.
That's my girl, Khadi C. The friend that cares more about your growth than your feelings.
I'm so my process now with coming out with my outline, it just really has strengthened my relationship with God. Because I'm like, let me find online or look for external ways to come up with topics. But I really just sat and meditated yesterday. Like, what do you want me to share with these people today? And this came about, so. All right. Welcome back to another episode of Ask Khadi, the voice of reason. I am your host, Khadi C. I hope everyone is well out there, doing good. I want to share something before I even get into the topic. This past week, my daughter, she started summer camp. And she was telling me how, when she was at camp, I asked her, I was like, did you see anyone from school? Because she's going to the summer camp in, the city that we live in. And I just randomly found this summer camp online. So I was like, did you see anybody from school, your kindergarten class? And she was like, no, I didn't see anyone. And I was to ask her that because when I dropped her off, she's in kindergarten now. She started school when she was 3. So I thought I was over the hump of that first day of school vibe, especially for your first child, how emotional, how scary it is. And when I was dropping her off, I felt the anxiety that I would get as a kid, just starting new, how major it is when you're going into a new environment. The possibilities, good and bad, that can happen, not just from a parent standpoint, but from a kid standpoint. Is she going to make friends? Is people going to like her? She's going to feel comfortable. All of that rushed to me in the last 10 seconds of me about to let her into the door. So it made me a little emotional. So when I got home, I just wanted to how was it? Did you know anyone? She was like, no, I didn't know anyone from school. I didn't see anyone from school there. She was like, Mommy, do you know some kids, they were crying when their parents were leaving? She was like, but I didn't cry. And I was like, well, why don't you cry? You've never cried when I would drop you off places and stuff. Why didn't you cry? She was like, because I think about all the fun that I'm going to have. And as a parent, my natural response or my automatic response was about to be, good job. But then I had to remember, when it comes to the good jobs that we give our kids, it's our way of trying to take credit for things that we've taught them. But I had to remember, I didn't teach her that. You know what I'm saying? That is something that's her. And then I had this thought of, I had to make her conscious of the fact that I need you to know that that is you, because it made me think about my journey in life now and how much it took me to later or now find out that certain things is just who is in me. It's my DNA, is who I was born to be. And having that confidence to use that as my compass when I'm going through life of what is for me, what is not for me. Am I in the right place? Am I in the wrong place, right? So in that moment, I had to tell her, that's just you. That's how you are. And the kids that were crying because their parents leave, that's how they are. And it's not good. It's not bad. It's just who you are, right? Because when I noticed how I was brought up, or what I always paid attention to, is when people would tell me what's good, what's bad. My thing was, I don't want to be bad. I don't want to be put on timeout or get a whooping, because I grew up in an African home. We didn't get timeouts. We got straight up whoopings. But I don't want to get in trouble with the teacher. I don't want detention. So we're taught good, bad, where we're not taught what is you. And what is you can sometimes be bad for someone else, but that's not your responsibility. And that's not your job to adjust yourself according to that. You know what I'm saying? And also the parts of you that, almost good and bad is subjective. Yes, we have overall, you don't want your kid, or you as a person don't want to do things that causes harm in society. But before you even meditate on the action that you don't want to do, you want to make sure you are that person at your core. You know what I'm saying? I don't get up and kill nobody, not just because I don't want to go to jail. It's not in me. I'm not that person, and honoring that, right? So in that moment that I was having with my daughter, I was just thinking about just how much we overlook the spiritual aspect of life. And I know the word spiritual is used and overused in this day and age. So I want to clarify what I mean by spiritual. I'm not talking about a specific religious belief or practice. I'm talking about the aspects of life we cannot see, right? So we have the physical aspect of life. I'm a woman, I'm a girl, I'm black. I know these things that I can physically describe, see, touch. The spiritual aspect of things like our personality, our character, our emotions, that is spiritual. Those are not things like I can smile at you right now and say I'm happy and be really miserable inside. So emotions are spiritual. It's like I can tell you that I'm happy and that you can believe me based on me smiling right now. But if I feel horrible inside, that is the real spiritual experience that I'm having. And it's really what's the lens that I'm looking through life at, right? So I was just thinking about like on this day and age, at least on my timeline, but we see it every day with these topics on podcasts and social media, people debating about are we going 50-50 in relationships, having kids, not having kids, all of these things, the do's and don'ts of life. You should be here. Should you be doing this? People shouldn't be partying. Like, it's so much debate around that. And one aspect that I feel like we overlook when we're talking about important life decisions is the spiritual aspect of it all, right? So I wanted to kind of get into that today and kind of highlight the things that we should be, the spiritual side of things that we should be focused on as we are navigating life and making life decisions. The main thing I think about is like when I found out I was pregnant with Arlie, my daughter. She's now 6 years old. And this was not a planned pregnancy. It was not like, I think I was given one of those girls that you probably think would never have kids and be the rich auntie. You know what I'm saying? Now I call myself the rich auntie with one kid, okay? You could still be a rich auntie with kids, but I just was given one of those girls that's just like, I'm going to live my best life and travel. So when I found out we were pregnant with Arlie, I really struggled a lot mentally, emotionally, because it was a realm of life that I was about to venture off into and I had no experience in. So my first instinct was try to find physical things that would confirm that this is the decision I need to be making if I was doing the right thing, right? So I remember one day being at work and we were all sitting around talking and all of the coworkers that I was sitting with, they were parents already. And we were just generally talking about, parenting and whatever like that, becoming a parent. And the guy was like, if somebody's going to have a kid, you got to at least have $30,000 saved in your account. Now, I sat there silent. I mean, he wasn't talking to me directly. We were talking in general. But when he said that, I got real silent. Because, baby, if we're being honest, I didn't even have $1 in my account. Actually, at that point, all my dollars are going through other... Like, I was not at that space, financially prepared to have a kid. But when I was thinking back on that moment, what I admire about myself, not just in that moment or with motherhood, but who I've been throughout my life is I know when to release and leave things up to just the spiritual aspect of life. So when he said that, I was like, well, I ain't got $30 in my account. But I knew God will figure it out for me, right? And when I say God, like I feel like you hear religious people talk about this. You hear spiritualists who like to meditate and stuff. The biggest thing about meditation is you must think about what you want to desire, but release it. And prayer, you got to have faith and then trust. All of that is the same thing. And when we are talking about the spiritual aspect, I feel like when people are saying the do's and don'ts, you got to have this amount of money before you have kids. You shouldn't go 50-50. A man should provide. You need to find a man that got a career already and da-da-da. Like all of these things are so overwhelming. But at what point do we sit and we release and be like, well, whatever is meant to happen is going to happen. The spiritual aspect of things, right? Because in that moment, going back to my story about with Arlie, I felt all of that. And now fast forward, I have Arlie. I'm the most financially stable that I've ever been. And that didn't happen until I had her. So I was so grateful for my naiveness. And I'm not telling people who don't got kids, be naive and go into it. I'm just saying, whatever is meant to happen in your life, you have to trust that it's meant to happen. And you will figure things out as they go, the spiritual aspect, right? So I could have went on Google, I could have took all the advice I was getting around. I got so much advice from people, or I had so many people who are already embarked on the journey of parenthood before me that I could have tried to mimic or use as a fear. Like this person went through that, that could possibly happen to me. But the biggest part of me getting to this point was really the releasing the releasing of it all, right? Knowing what I wanted in my heart, knowing what I didn't want in my heart, but also releasing it out there and trusting the spiritual aspect of it to go the way it's supposed to go, right? So I use that example to really want to just focus and talk about like how much of the spiritual aspects of life we overlook and we don't consider when we are navigating life and when we are thinking about just the things we want out of life, right? So first, we're going to start with our emotions, right? Y'all know I'm on this journey of getting more connected with myself emotionally, so I talk about I feel like I've been saying emotions like 100 times today, right? But our emotions, though at times could be fickle, it can also be our compass to know, like, you know what I'm saying, what is happening in the spiritual world for us, right? You know what I'm saying? Everything that comes about in this life, it starts as a spirit, it starts as a thought, spiritual. I can't go in your brain right now. I'm looking at Greg, the producer. I can't go in and grab your thoughts. I can I can ask you, tell me your thoughts. You can lie and tell me nothing, or like, you know, tell me a lot, like nothing, that's something that's not in your thoughts, right? So thoughts is something that's a part of the spiritual realm, right? So when it comes to our emotions, for me, when it comes to using it as a compass, when I'm setting my goals, I've learned to stop making my goals physical things, right? Like I want X amount of this. I want this specific job. I want this type of relationship. Instead, I try to hone in on my emotions. What do I want to feel? Right? I said this before when people say, "Oh, I just want to be $1 million." I want to no, you just want to feel stability. You don't need $1 million to feel stable, right? Believe it or not, right? Or it's like I want to be this. I want to be a doctor. You want to feel validated. Like there's an emotion we tie to every single outcome we want out of life. There's an emotion tied to it, and when we really focus more on that emotion, we'll realize that there's 100 ways to get to that feeling. Like, you know what I'm saying? We don't need this specific outcome to get us this specific emotion, right? And more importantly, we don't have to wait as long, right? If I tell myself, oh, I know I'm gonna be successful when I finally become a doctor, or when this podcast making #1 and I'm famous, but it's like, as I've been even doing my podcast now on this level and working my way up, I'm getting satisfied. I'm getting the feeling that I always wanted, is to be operating in life and doing things that I feel like are true to me and operating in my purpose. I'm doing that now, and it doesn't make a difference. Emotionally, it won't make a difference whether I'm doing it on this scale or I'm out in Los Angeles with this big time network or whatever. So really understanding our emotional state, and understanding that our emotional state manifest our physical life experiences, right? So always tapping in emotionally. What do I want to feel? I think about the woman Ebony K. Williams. Yeah, I saw that she first went viral. I believe she's a lawyer or ex-lawyer. She has a podcast too, but she went viral because she was like, she won't date a bus driver. Y'all remember that? She was on the Breakfast Club. She was like, I won't date a bus driver or whatever. I will only date a CEO, like, you know, men of certain caliber. And they caused this whole uproar, right? And I definitely won't knock her for her. As women, like especially black women, we are taught that we're not supposed to have standards. This is how white people operate too. Like I saw this video on TikTok where there was like white women train their girls to go to school and look for a husband, and like he got to be this, he got to have this. You know what I'm saying? So I understand that, but I felt like in her conversation, I felt like she was disconnected from her emotions, because what she was saying, I felt like saying, "Oh, I don't want to date a bus driver." I think she believed that she would get a certain type of emotional experience based on that. Like, you know, based on a guy's job, right? Or her partner's job. And this is where I don't want to use the word feel sad, like saying that how she's thinking is pitiful, but I do believe we all are guilty of feeling like we could dodge certain lessons we're meant to experience in this life by chasing a certain outcome, right? It's almost like, oh, when people say, oh, once I get in a relationship, I'll be happy. And that disappointment when you get one and you're still battling certain emotions that you have, right? Once I get this job and I'm making X amount of money, I'm gonna be good. And you get that job and you're making X amount of money and you're not happy. Or it didn't bring you the satisfaction you expected. That I've experienced that so much in my life, and the disappointment is real because now you feel like you're starting back at square one. So using like hearing her story, I'm like, I hate that people don't realize that there's also a spiritual aspect of life. And like when we are going after these physical things or these materialistic goals or these things that might look good to the eye, we're not double checking and making sure we're also being intentional about the emotional experience we want with these things and focusing more on that. What's up?
Could you speak to why it is that I've always wanted to be a dad? What about that says there?
You know why? Okay, so you want me to speak on why you have this feeling of you always wanted to be a dad. So before you became a dad, that is something you always chased. I could think of 100 emotions now that kind of relate to that. It could be wanting to be accepted. It could be wanting to be loved. You hear a lot of that, and I'm not saying that to you specifically, but when people say they want children, a lot of times it's like, I want to feel unconditional love. Like, you know what I'm saying? And with children, a lot of times, because we feel like we have more control of that. Like, it's our kid, it's going to be our baby, it's going to be, you know what I'm saying? But then when we put that type of expectation, even on something like parenting or becoming a mom or becoming a dad, it's like, you can still be let down because it can't substitute that. Like everything that we are internally manifests physically. It doesn't work backwards. So I can't just have a kid, don't have love in me for myself, and have a kid and think it's gonna give it to me. Life don't work like that. Life is if it works like that, a lot of us wouldn't be dealing with the emotional, but like you know what I'm saying, you would get these things and it'll be all good. Like you know what I'm saying? If it's like, oh, I just want to feel fulfilled, I'm gonna go do this thing and get fulfilled. And I'm sure a million people could relate. You do this thing or you get this experience or you become a parent, you're still battling. It's always what you're gonna chase it. But when you are that, it always shocks me, like with me and my parenting journey, people are like, how are you always able to do this with your daughter? You travel still, you didn't. It's like, this is me. It is not a facade. Like, this is when you know people are who they say they are. When their life reflects the person that they say they are. You know what I'm saying? We can all talk a good game. I'm this type of person, or even the things that we force ourselves to do. But your situation, like, we could use Diddy as an example. Diddy was Mr. Love, Mr. Successful, Mr. This, da da da. All of this stuff that's coming out about him is just a physical manifestation of what is spiritually going on inside of him. And you don't never dodge that lesson. No matter how much money you have in life, no matter how much success you have in life, it will catch up. You know what I'm saying? So when I was thinking about the Ebony K. Williams, because now she decided to have a kid, and I don't know, I'm using her as an example, but I don't know too much of her journey. But when she made the decision to have a kid by herself through a donor, because you know time is ticking. Oh, she feels like time is ticking. It's like, I want to have a kid. I'm not gonna wait until I find the right one. And when I saw that, I was really just hoping. I was like, I hope she doesn't think that she's gonna have that kid and is gonna fill the void. I hope she's not doing this to fill voids, because that disappointment is gonna hurt. It's gonna hurt. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's like, I feel like she didn't say this, but just using her situation as an example perspective, is like, if you feel like, okay, I want to only have date CEOs, because I feel like you probably associate an emotional outcome with a CEO. They will take care of me. They will love me. They will put me first. They will give me safety. Especially as I don't know how I don't know much about how she grew up, but especially as Black women, when you grow up in a struggle, safety is a big thing. And safety is really emotional safety. People say, I like my man to protect. I always say, like, I used to say, oh, I like a protector, someone who, I'm like, I'm not the person that's gonna have that kind of drama, right? I don't got nobody out here trying to kill me. So really, when we want that protection, it's more emotional protection than anything. I want someone who is gonna cater to me and put me first. And I feel like she has an idea of that, being with someone that has this level of success will give me that, and it does not necessarily mean that. So I was like, oh my God, I fear that she did this not for the wrong reason, but with a specific expectation, and if that's not fulfilled, it's gonna really crush her. Yeah, for sure. I do think that getting disappointed, like having an expectation and getting disappointed is what triggers people to then go in. Or you can hope that it does. For everyone, like sometimes it might take people longer. Then there's like maybe it was that thing. You know what I'm saying? Like, oh, I had an expectation that this marriage would work out, but we got a divorce. It was my wife. If I find another, you know what I'm saying, thing, if I find another wife, then it's gonna work out. So they continue that cycle. So it's not everyone is on different spiritual levels. Like me in school, everybody in different grades, everyone is on different spiritual levels. Some people might have to repeat it over and over, but it does trigger that. But before it triggers the I need to heal, the pain, that there's a grief in that. When you have the expectation for something to turn out the way you want it to and it doesn't, before we can even get to like, oh, healing, like that grief, it's literally like a death. It's literally like a death. I've been in phases of grief. I'm in phases of grief now of things that I wish would have turned out this way or expected this thing. And it's an ongoing process. And when it comes to grief, I lost a parent. Grief lives with you. That's not something you overcome. You can overcome sadness. You can overcome anxiety. You don't overcome grief. You live with it and it gets better over time. You know what I'm saying? But you live with it. Like, you know what I'm saying? Right. So that's why I'm always like, oh, I feel bad for people who think that this is it. Like when I hear on social media when people say like, oh, I need a man that does this, or I need a job that does this, I got to make this amount of money. And I'm like, I'm all for y'all saying the things that sound good, but can we start with things that feel good first? Like, you know what I'm saying? Work with the feelings. And feelings are always simple. That's the thing. When we are talking about the things that we want on a physical level, it's so complicated. Oh yeah, he gotta be a CEO, but then he also gotta be here for the family. But he also gotta put me first. Like what? It's just like I don't want to say it's unrealistic because we should all have expectations and standards for ourselves. But when we are setting this expectation to give us a certain emotional feeling, it sounds delulu. Like, you know what I'm saying? We are not gonna get, we're not gonna get our cake and eat it too. Which leads me to the spiritual lessons, right? I've come to believe that we are all here to learn a lesson, good and bad. We want to look at good karma, bad karma. And I feel like our life experiences, though it may not always look appealing or meet society standards, it is something we are meant to go to. One thing for me is having a kid out of wedlock, right? I have a very extreme African Muslim family. We don't even do boyfriends. We are taught no boys, marriage. That's the jump. No boys, don't ever look at a boy and then tomorrow, when are you getting married? Like, it's literally that, right? And for me, I didn't go that route. Like, you know what I'm saying? I didn't intentionally not go that route, but it didn't work out that way. My timeline didn't work out that way. But I always say, oh my God, I was meant to have my child first before, although I love her dad, I was in love with her dad, but before I really built up my values on partnership. I was never the person that like, you know how girls, you always talk about like, oh, I was daydreaming, I want to have my fan and take care of my man, my man. Like, growing up as a kid, I had crushes I loved, but I always grew up, and I think not from my physical life experience, but emotionally, my experience in life was an emotional battle. Like learning to put myself first. I had this feeling that only I care about what my needs are. It could be a middle child syndrome thing, but I operated in life like that from a more of a selfish state. So I couldn't imagine, even with me being with someone that I loved, really building up the level of commitment, dedication, and being able to sustain certain things, being willing, not able, being willing to stick through certain things. I would not have learned that level of spiritual strength or gained that level of spiritual strength if I didn't have a daughter first. That opened up the floodgates for all of that. Not just for my daughter, but because she opened that up, I started to become a better friend, a better daughter, a better lover, all of these things. So I always be like, oh my God, I was meant to have a kid first. So when I talk about like people like, you know, we want to follow societal standards in the timeline, but for real, if life was that simple, if life was so simple where we could just be born and given a roster, or what do they call it in college? A syllabus on steps on what we're supposed to do, what would be the point of life? I do believe that everybody has their own journey, literally, and everybody have their own ways on how they're supposed to get to where they're going. And it's not always going to be in the chronological order that society tells us to do it. So considering your spiritual lesson, I remember watching Black Ink. Sky, she's like a popular one of the stars on Black Ink. And she ended up coming up one season. If you never saw the show, one season she ended up opening up about the fact that she had two kids that she gave up for adoption when she was 15. Now, Sky, prior to her opening up about having kids, she was the firecracker on the show. Girl was always fighting. Your typical hood girl. Like, she was always fighting, always direct. But you could tell there was always this rage in her. Like, you know what I'm saying? She was one of my favorite characters. She was funny or whatever like that. But you could tell, like most people, me growing up in the hood, you see that. People just have this rage about them. Like, they're just angry, right? And they lash out unexpectedly on all kinds of things and all kinds of people or whatever. So the season that she revealed that she had a son, she gave her sons to a white family with a good, what she said had a good background, were stable because she was 15. She didn't have all of that. She grew up in the hood, I believe Brooklyn, and just struggled. And the one son, the oldest, so she had an older son and they were close in age. The oldest son, the younger son embraced her. Like, I'm so happy to meet my mom for the first time, blah, blah. The oldest son, who looked just like her, had that same rage that she displayed throughout the seasons before she talked about having a son. And he was angry. He was angry, and at her, but he was just an angry kid. You could tell that. And I thought it was so interesting that she gave him a different upbringing than she had. He was with a whole different race. He was with a whole different environment, and he still had that thing. And I was like, because he was her spiritual lesson. So either way, you thought, like, sometimes we do things or we make decisions, not saying that it was a bad decision that she gave him up for adoption, but if she had the expectation that I'm doing this, so at least I don't have to deal with that part. Like, you know what I'm saying? Sometimes God puts you through certain things like, oh, you have a kid at 15. And you're going to go through these hardships to get you through this spiritual lesson that you have to learn. And the fact that she gave him a better upbringing and then distanced herself from him, and she still had to face that years down the line, is like, confirms my belief that no matter whatever you're here to learn, you're going to learn it. Whatever you're here to experience, you're going to experience it. And the beauty of it is all meant for good. It's all meant to get you to the other side of whatever, of the better life that you think you're seeking or whatever. So, I kind of talked on all of this. Oh, let's get into the last point, right? So I talked about our emotions. That's a spiritual aspect of life that we need to hone in on. And our spiritual lessons, aka good and bad karma. The last, but certainly not least, thing is our relationship with ourselves. And that kind of leads on to the question you asked about, like, feeling like I felt like I always wanted to be with a dad. I feel like I said, I feel like most people may have that experience, have that feeling because they think that it's going to help them avoid the parts of themselves that they really need to be conquering, right? So your relationship with yourself, and I've been doing a lot of that lately. I mentioned in a previous episode about your shadow self, right? And I heard that terminology so much. Your shadow self, your shadow self. Yeah, I be on spiritual TikTok a lot, so they always talk about that. But the other day I saw a clip and I finally figured out what that meant, like what your shadow self really is. A practice they did was she just asked a bunch of random questions, like, why don't anyone love you? Why do you hate yourself? All these random questions, right? And it was like, as she went through the question, she said, whatever question triggers an emotion with you, dig deeper into that and keep asking the whys. So she was saying all these things like, why do you think you're ugly? Skip that. I don't think I'm ugly. I was like random. But then the question was, why do you think your parents hate you? And I have, my father passed away, but I have a good relationship with my parents. But when that triggered me, I was like, wait, what is that? And I started digging deeper. I realized that my biggest thing is approval from people. So even when I was reflecting, I was like, there's been times where if someone like they don't like me, I want to wait. Why? Like it triggers something in me, even if there's no physical proof or there's confirmation. Like I know I didn't do anything. I still get triggered by that question because of how much validation I seek in other people. And it made me, so as I was going deeper, 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 eventually, as you go deeper into the question that triggers you the most, you lead to one word, and it's an emotion. And mine was shame. I realized my shadow self is suffering with shame. And I couldn't figure out why that is. And I was reflecting on random small situations that created this big emotion of shame in me. One of the ones was I was walking my dog. And I'm really big on people picking up after their pets, right? But this specific day, it was a wild day, okay? I was just like stressed out. I was on the phone. It was just a lot going on. And when I got downstairs, I realized I didn't bring the doggy bags, right? But I'm like, I'm not finna walk all the way back upstairs. F it. We gonna be a villain today, right? So I'm walking around with the dog. I'm on the phone and my dog pooped. And I'm like, well, today I don't got no bags. So we just gonna have to leave this here. And out of nowhere, this random older guy rolled down his window and he's like, you're not gonna pick that up? Instantly. You would think, you see how you rolled your eyes? The adult thinking would be like, who are you talking to? Like, first of all, I went into 5-year-old shame mode. My initial respect, I don't have a bag. And then after I did that, then I'm like, who is it? It took a while for me to, but like, it took a couple minutes for me to really channel my present self reaction. I instantly went into child. So what did I do wrong? I think, and it kind of goes back to what I talked about earlier. Kids were constantly praised and guided through good and bad. You know what I'm saying? Not being taught how to self-soothe and be okay and build up your confidence and give yourself grace. We're not taught those emotions young. So I feel like that moment that made me go into little kid was like, oh my God, I did something bad. You know what I'm saying? Not considering you're having a stressful day. You forgot the bag for the first time today. That's okay. Right? And standing up for that inner child me when he say that, like, well, no, I'm not picking it up. And being okay with that, right? So that relationship with yourselves, now that I'm in this space of like figuring out that mind shame, I've been doing this on my own personal therapy of shame therapy. So doing things that makes me embarrassed. And it's dumb things that you like, why are you embarrassed about that? Like, one of the things is I went back to listening to this podcast, the first episode. Child, cringy. I know people always say they don't like hearing. First of all, I don't like hearing my own voice. I'm just getting to a place where I have to listen back to the podcast. Before I came back here, I was editing my podcast myself, and the torture of having to listen to my voice, I hated it. But listening, I recorded my first episode 2017. Listening, first of all, in that episode, my co-host or the person that was on with me was a friend that I'm no longer friends with. Well, she's a relative. You can't ex a relative, right? She's not my ex-relative. She's still my cousin. But we were good. We were like best friends, the closest person to me, and we no longer speak. So even getting to that, like having to cringe through that. And then just how I would, like, it was certain things that I was so confident about, like my perspective of things, that now I'm like, ugh, like, right? It was also good to see certain things that I was saying in that episode that I still say to this day, like, oh, you weren't lying. You believe this, right? But as I was listening to the episode, I'm not gonna lie, I paused it a couple of times, like, this is cringy. Like, I don't feel like it. But what I started to do was hype up that version of me. I love how you were so confident. Like, that's an art that I'm now trying to get back. There was a point in time where it's like, I said what I said, and I don't second guess it, and I don't overthink. What if people don't agree with me? What if I hurt someone's feelings when I say, what if? Like, not trusting in my intention, still needing that external validation. There was a point in time where I wasn't like that. So instead of me cringing or shaming myself, like, why would you say that? Like, why are you so confident about that? Look at what you've been through, like, or whatever the case is. But I was like, oh, yeah, I love that when I see, I'm talking about me in third person. I love that she thought that way. I love the confidence that she had in herself and how sure she was of herself, like bigging up that version of me, right? So in your journey of building your relationship with yourself, I think we're always talking about evolving and growing ourselves and learning more. Before we get into the more, get back into like honing in on loving on who you are now, who you were then. Like every version of ourself is coming with us as we grow through life, as we go through the different phases of life, and loving up on that version of you. That's what I've been doing in my journey of building that relationship with yourself. It's uncomfortable, but doing the uncomfortable thing is usually what gets you to the other side of things. So those are my three key points when I talk about us really just getting into the spiritual stuff. And I'm going to repeat it again. When I say getting into the spiritual aspect of life, the things that we don't see, the things that we can't hold, but the things, it is the thing that really determine who we become in life, literally, simply put. So let's get into my favorite part of the podcast, which is the Ask Khadi question. You guys have been submitting your questions anonymously. I have one here. I don't know if we have time for me to give you guys two, but I should have screenshot this the first time. Let me pull this up. Okay, we got something here. Ooh, this is a different question. So this is anonymous. It says, "How do you deal with toxic family members?" I would say that, but you know what? I'm gonna connect this to what we talking about. The spiritual aspect. Anything and anyone that triggers us is truly a reflection of something that's inside of us. So that's why when you say you don't deal with them, yeah, you don't have to deal with them. But when you catch yourself being moved by certain things, I think you should deal with that emotion because it's telling you something about yourself. And when it comes to family, that's usually the tough thing because there's this standard society puts on relatives. You got to love your mom. You should get along with your mom. You should get along with your siblings. You should. This is your family. That's the first thing they say when you have a falling out or something go wrong. It's like you should do this because there's textbook definitions on how relationship with your family should look, right? Not considering the fact that every family is different, every experience is different, right? But dealing with toxic family members is one, breaking down that expectation you have, right? We all have expectations of what we think our mom should be to us, what we think our dad should be to us. And a lot of times what makes a family member toxic is when they no longer become that. I think we make it toxic. Not saying no matter what they did to you, we make it toxic by having this expectation, right? It's almost like, oh, I expect this random person to do this for me. And constantly, and when they don't do it, still constantly showing up expecting them to do it. That is toxic to yourself. It's delulu. Why do you keep doing the same thing and expecting different results? That's the thing when it comes to family. We keep upholding this expectation of the title that they serve in our life. And then keep that expectation. So every time you experience this version of them that you have consistently experienced throughout your relationship, you're back at square one of that emotion because you're holding up the expectation. So I think we will start there. When it comes to dealing with toxic family members, is really dealing with the expectations you have on them, right? And not just for yourself, but for them. You got to give people grace. People are the version of life they experience. And when we're talking about family members, although we might be connected by blood, we have no control of what they went through life and the lens that they look at life from based on the experiences that they had, right? So removing that expectation first and foremost is the number one thing you should do when it comes to dealing with toxic family members, and then creating your own expectation. Meaning, okay, if I know, what DMX said this, believe people to show up as who they are. Like, believe them. If someone show you I'm selfish, believe them, right? It's almost like as a kid, if we see a 1-year-old, I know this 1-year-old can't pour coffee. I believe that. I would never hand him a cup of coffee or ask him to go pour me a cup of coffee. Then it would just become toxic if I didn't go and ask this 1-year-old to pour me a cup of coffee and he spills it, burns himself, and now I got a DIFUS case, and now I'm in jail, and I'm gonna be like, oh, they so toxic. That little baby so toxic spilled a cup of coffee, right? Extreme example, but this is really what it is when it comes to family and these expectations. So setting new expectations based on who they have consistently showed yourself to be. And if that means that you no longer maybe have communication with this family member, being okay with that. Being okay with that, right? Being okay with doing the things that's like healthy for your mental health, your emotional state, but also making sure you're not doing it from a state of avoidance, right? We always say, okay, every situation does not require cut them off, right? Sometimes it's avoidance. And that's the thing that I've had to learn because avoidance is my middle name. If I don't have to deal, I won't deal. And I will find a way to not deal because I just don't feel like focusing on it. But when we avoid things, we experience it in different areas. That's another thing. Sometimes that toxic family member, what you experience from that toxic family member, oftentimes is end up being what you experience in other relationships in life. Almost like how people be like, oh, you end up dating your mom, you end up dating your dad, and there'll be people who are like, I hate my dad. You end up being with somebody just like him. You end up being, when you avoid and you don't really deal with the internal, emotional, spiritual side of what you are experiencing with these toxic family members or toxic situations, it still ends up being manifested in other areas of your life. So it becomes a cycle. So that is the advice I would give you. Removing the expectation, giving them grace, and then setting new expectations based on the information you pull and your emotional needs without avoiding. So I hope that helps. I really, truly hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and I hope it helps. If it helps one person, I'm happy. If you made it this far, make sure you have like and subscribe to YouTube channel if you haven't already, so you can get notified whenever I drop new episodes, and rate the podcast on Apple Podcasts so we can get up there. I definitely want to start, if you put comments or comments on that, reviews on the Apple Podcast, I'll definitely try to shout you guys out on the next episode. And if you have any advice that you might need on any situation, go to www.axkhadi.com and I will answer it on the next episode, or possibly on the social media platform if it's too many to answer on one episode. So yeah, bye guys. Thank you so much for joining.
That's my girl, Khadi C, the friend that cares more about your growth than your feelings.